Good morning. Welcome back to the shop. I'm so glad you're here. So today we have lots to look at here, but we are going to start with this MS291. Let's go to the bench. Good morning. Welcome back to my workbench. Today we have the Stihl MS291. This is a 55cc farm class saw. Probably one of the most common saws on the market today. Stihl sells a ton of these. They have an attractive price point when they're on sale. So this was, customer says, it runs poorly and it bogs out. So we're gonna find out what's wrong. So I wanna take this out and just hear it run, but I'm gonna check the fuel first just to make sure there's fuel in it and that it's not water. I'm gonna show you something. This is an example of a bad fuel sample. So this came in somebody's chainsaw, not this chainsaw, but another chainsaw. That's the fuel. That's water, rust, dirt, God knows what else. He was trying to start it and run it off of this fuel. Okay, let's check the fuel in this saw. Okay. I don't see any water. I do see some dirt floating around in it. I'll dump it out and then we'll have a closer look. Can you see that? Doesn't look like there's any water in it. Lots of dirt, sawdust. But water's what I'm mainly looking for here. I want to try to replicate his issue. So I'm going to put this fuel back in the saw, take it out and start it, and see how it runs. So I know I just poured his dirty fuel back into his dirty fuel tank, and the tank has to be cleaned out and he'll get a new fuel filter. But the reason I did that is because I want to try to replicate the issue. I have in the past dumped someone's fuel out, put my fresh fuel in it, and taken the saw outside, and I couldn't replicate the issue. So that's why I did that. Before I go out, I'm going to retension this. His chain is way too loose. I already tried to take the front bar nut off, and I had to get the breaker bar. He's got the bar nuts on this thing way too tight. He's going to strip it if he's not careful. I'll try this back bar nut, but wait. That looks better. Okay. So a couple quick observations here. The bar oil reservoir is empty. Half a tank of fuel, but no bar oil. His chain is dull. His chain is dry. His bar and chain are wore out. The grooves are worn. The bar nuts are cranked on way too tight. I'm going to take a guess that, so because he's running no bar oil, this chain is getting super hot. It's wearing the bar and chain. It's loosening. He thinks his bar is loose. He keeps tightening these, thinking that's going to tighten the bar up. And that's why we're in the mess we're in. I'll put some bar oil in it before I take it outside. Okay, let's go outside and start it. So the saw idles okay. When I try to throttle it up, it doesn't want to transition from idle to higher speeds. I can kind of feather it up, but then eventually it does bog and die. This saw is running lean. If your saw is starving for fuel, it's also starving for oil. And just to be clear, I'm talking about the oil in your gas, not your chain oil. If you have a chainsaw and you have to feather the throttle to get it to rev up, you should probably stop before you do any further damage and find out why it's doing this. This saw and most other Stihls have an accelerator pump in the carburetor. When I hit the throttle on this saw, it should smoothly and quickly accelerate. Today, we're going to find out exactly why this saw is doing this. Don't go anywhere. Let's get the bar and chain off the saw. Oh, a sawdust turd. So with the bar and chain off here, what I can see, the chain catcher is there. You can see it pretty chewed up. So that's from the chain derailing. But that's why it's there, is to catch it. And that keeps it from coming and wrapping around or maybe hitting you in the hand. He's due for a new sprocket. It's worn pretty badly. I see discoloration here in the sprocket and the muffler. That's signs that this thing's been running really hot. In here, I would normally see lots of wet, caked on sawdust. It's dry, and I'm pretty sure he didn't clean it. Also, this, like you can see how, like that should be just full of wet sawdust, and everything is just dry. So with the bar and chain off, I'm going to take this outside and start it and just make sure that it is oiling. I have put bar oil in it. I don't see any oil here, and I was running it for a couple minutes. So let's go outside and check. I'll meet you out there. This saw is oiling fine. Its only oiling problem was that somebody wasn't adding bar oil to it. Well, let's pop the top cover off this and have a look at the air filter and the spark plug. T27, 3 of them. Oh boy. That is filthy. So this air filter is unbelievably caked in like just dust. It's just fine, fine dust. I can't imagine how any air is getting through that. All around it, there's just fine dust. It's everywhere. The cylinder's air fins. Yeah, they're totally, everything's just covered in a layer of it. Wow. Just in case you're wondering where dust like this comes from, this is the result of cutting with a dull chain. So when you cut with a sharp chain, you make chips. When you cut with a dull chain, you make dust. And that dust sticks to everything in your saw, clogs up your air filter. I can just imagine what else we're going to find here. It acts like an insulation. The air fins of the cylinder are totally packed. Like this saw has probably been overheating. I'm going to very carefully take this air filter off. I'm really curious to see what's behind it and if the saw has been sucking dirt or not. It's surprisingly clean. That air filter does an amazing job. Look at that. So there's his air filter, and there's what a new air filter looks like. Dust. I'm going to put this air filter back on for now so that I can go clean this up. And then when I get back, we're going to do a fuel system check. I'll be right back. Okay, so I've got the saw all cleaned up here, the best I can right now. The air filter, it looks clean, but it's not. The dust and dirt is embedded right in the fabric. So if we do repair this saw, he'll be getting a new air filter. Let's take this spark plug out and have a look at it and have a look down the spark plug hole. Okay, there's a spark plug. It's a little carboned up, but not terrible. I've seen much worse. Okay, let's take a peek down the spark plug hole. Everything in there looks fine, actually. You probably want to see what I'm looking at, but it's hard to show you down this hole with my flashlight. My new camera just arrived. I'm going to unpack this and we'll test it out for the first time on this chainsaw. I'll be right back. That's everything. Okay, let's go in the hole. And there is the exhaust port. You're seeing a carbon buildup in there. The cylinder walls look good. The top of the piston is covered in carbon buildup. overall it looks pretty good in here. Okay, let's get the fuel out of the saw, remove the fuel filter, and we're gonna do a fuel system check. We've already examined the fuel, so I'm just gonna dump it in here and get rid of it. Fish my fuel filter out. I get asked about this tool and my other tools all the time. I'm gonna do an upcoming video where I talk about all this stuff and where they come from and part numbers and all of that. Fuel filter off. Got my pressure vac tester here. I'm going to hook it up to my fuel line. I'm going to make sure I'm set to pressure, which I am, and I'm going to pump this up to 0.7 bar. And I'm going to watch for this to hold pressure. Which it is. Okay, so that test tells us that the fuel line is not leaking and the pump side of the carburetor is not leaking either. Oh, unhook my tool here, just let that drop down in. So the next thing I'm going to check is the fuel tank vent. Okay, so we'll remove our dirty air filter. 8 mil. Now I'm going to remove the choke rod right here. There's little grommets here with a peg going through them, so I was just pulling the peg out of the grommet on both sides. Just going to pull that off to the side. It has wires attached to it. I just want to slip the carb out of here. Just gently push the fuel line off of it. And there's the carburetor. Okay, so I've got my pressure vac tester again, and I'm going to hook up to the fuel line here. So I'm going to test pressure and vacuum. These newer saws, and not all models, but some of them, the tanks have to hold pressure. The older saws don't, but this is one that does. I'll make sure that I'm on pressure. And I'm going to go to 0.5 bar. And I'm going to watch for it to hold. Which it is. And now I'll do my vacuum test. So I'm going to move this to vacuum. So this should not hold vacuum. If the tank vent is working properly, I shouldn't be able to build vacuum, which I can't. So the tank holds pressure and the tank vent is working. We did a pressure test on the fuel tank and it holds pressure, which is supposed to. And then we pulled vacuum, which is testing the tank vent, and I couldn't build vacuum. which is what I want. If it would have built vacuum and held, that would mean the tank vent wasn't working. So everything is okay with this. So the fuel line, the fuel tank, and the tank vent have passed their test. Before I go into the carburetor, we're going to do a quick pressure vac test on this saw, and that will let us know if this saw has any air leaks, crank seals, intake boot, if there's any issues like that. And if it passes the test, then we'll continue on into this carburetor. The areas on this saw that we're going to seal up are the intake, the spark plugs. We'll put our spark plug back in. There's no decompression valve, so we don't have to worry about that. And we're going to seal up the muffler. Okay, so I'm going to use this tool to plug up the intake, and it's going to take care of the impulse as well. This is a tool from Stihl. So I put that on, and then I put two little washers on, and those just protect my tool from getting chewed up. Now I'll put the spark plug back in the hole. So all that's left here is to remove my muffler and seal up my exhaust port. I got one little thing here to remove, one's missing, and then T27s. Muffler off. So while I have this off, do you want to look at the piston from the exhaust side? Yeah? Okay, no problem. Here we're looking at the exhaust side of the piston, and it is covered in a carbon buildup. Not carbon scoring, but a buildup. The piston rings are free. I think this buildup is from his oil. Okay, so we just had a look in there at the piston from the exhaust side. Both rings are loose. The black you're seeing up and down in the piston, that's not carbon scoring, but it's a buildup of carbon. I don't know exactly what causes that. It might be that he's using the wrong type of oil. I don't really know. If you know, leave it in the comments because I'd love to know what that is. So I've got my fault analysis book here from Stihl. I'm looking through at the different piston failures, and there's one condition called carbonization, which it describes as unsuitable engine oil has been used, which sticks between the piston rings and piston and restricts movement of the rings. That's the closest thing I can find in here to what this might be. But if you know something different or you know what this is, please go ahead and tell me. It's not carbon scoring because if I stick my pick in it, in that black buildup, it just flakes right off the piston. Now I'm going to seal up my exhaust port so we can complete this pressure vac test. I've got my adapter here, the rubber, and I'm going to use my two muffler screws to attach this. There we go. I just thought of something I wanted to say before I went any further. Is in this muffler is a spark arrestor. I took the screw out and I'll remove the spark arrestor. It's kind of stuck in there. There it is. It's clean. So the spark arrestor is not our problem. Okay, let's go ahead with our pressure vac test. We're going to test vacuum first. Our saw is sealed up, exhaust, spark plug, intake, impulse. In theory, this saw should be airtight, and we're going to find out for sure. Got my tester. Hook it up there. Make sure I'm on vacuum. I'm going to pull vacuum to half a bar. Just going to rotate the flywheel. If there is any leak in the saw, I want to find it. And the saw is holding vacuum. Still holding. Just give that intake boot a wiggle. Sometimes the intake boot can have a leak, and until you wiggle it, it won't show itself. There's no vacuum leak there. Okay, now we'll do a pressure test. So I'll move this over to pressure. And then I'm going to pump this up to half a bar. And we're going to look for leaks again. Rotate the flywheel. Wiggle the intake boot. That saw is tight. So when I move the flywheel back and forth while I'm testing, what I'm looking for is a crank seal leak. Sometimes when I do that, you'll see the gauge kind of bob a little bit. That's normal. That's just air moving around. We're just moving air around in there. But what we're looking at is for the gauge to drop when I rotate that, and it's not. Okay, so we know this saw is airtight. Just for fun, let's test the fuel filter. I'm going to try to pull, vacuum. It shouldn't hold. I shouldn't be able to build any. Which I can't. So this problem wasn't caused from a plugged fuel filter. Next, I'm going to remove my intake tool here, and we're going to test the impulse signal. That's a test I haven't showed you yet, so this will be a first time. So I'm going to plug in to the impulse hole right there. I'm going to remove my spark plug. I'm going to pull this over. The spark plug is out. You're going to see this gauge move rapidly from vacuum to pressure, back and forth. This impulse signal is what drives the fuel pump in the carburetor. You ready? that's acting as it should. I know this may seem like I've done a lot of work, but if I wasn't filming, talking, explaining everything I've done here today, I could do in about 15 or 20 minutes. I now know that this saw is airtight. We've tested the tank, we've tested the fuel line, we've tested the tank vent, we've tested the impulse signal. So all I really haven't done is look at the carburetor and do a compression test. I know everyone loves a good compression test, so let's do one. Okay, I'm just going to remove my exhaust block here, and then we'll go ahead with the compression test. Got my compression tester here. This came from Echo. At 145 psi. That's lots of compression. Okay, so first observations of this carburetor. All the screws, I don't see any tool marks on them, so I don't think anybody has been into it. But the high jet, the low jet has never been touched. The high jet has screwdriver marks in it, so someone's been trying to jam something down in there. So let's do some further testing on this. Let's take the diaphragm side off and we'll test the needle and seat. Someone told me a story in the comments about one of his techs putting a screwdriver through the palm of his hand. So how dangerous it is to hold a carburetor in your hand and do this. So I'm going to make an effort to not do that. Thanks for that comment. So the diaphragm has some creases in it. I don't like that really. I'm just going to peel it back. I'm going to let the diaphragm dry and then I'll have a look at it. I'm going to go ahead and test the needle and seat. So I'm going to hook my line up to the fuel inlet. And make sure I'm on pressure. And I'm going to go 0.7 bar very slowly because it'll get there fast. Looks like it's holding. I'll just do this one more time. So 0.7 bar. When I tap this, it seals right back up. So there's nothing wrong with the needle and seat. Remove my tool. And I'm going to take the pump side of the carburetor off. That fuel has not a good smell to it. Okay, so inside here, it looks pretty clean. The screen is there. There's nothing in it. This here, like that pump is distorted. I'm gonna say, like, this fuel coming out of this reeks. Low quality fuel, low quality oil. I'm gonna rebuild this carburetor and new air filter, of course. A few little things, and I think this saw is gonna work just fine. This diaphragm here has dried some. It has creases in it. It's distorted. It's kind of crunchy. So low quality fuel will do this to gaskets. Here's another quick look at this. It's just completely worn. This fuel pump is pretty crispy. Ethanol. That's what ethanol fuel does. I'm going to go look up the carb kit. Hopefully I have it in stock here, and then I can get this fixed and get this saw back together today. I'll be right back. I found my carb kit. Here is my old diaphragm and my new one. You can see how distorted and creased this is. And my old fuel pump and my new one. My new one lies perfectly flat there. My old one is totally distorted and crispy and not good. These are both completely worn out. If you're rebuilding a carburetor and need to get a carb kit for it, on the carb is a set of numbers. Those are the numbers that you'll need to locate your carb kit. Let's rebuild this carburetor. First thing I have to do is scrape this diaphragm gasket off of here. So I'm just going to use a knife for that. You want to do this without scratching the aluminum. Just try to get underneath it and just pull it up off of there. You don't want to dig into the aluminum. You just want to gently scrape it off towards the outside. You try to not get stuff in there. That looks pretty good. I'll just give that a quick blowout and then we'll move on. The pump side of my carburetor, that gasket came off really easy. But if that was ever stuck on there, it's very hard to scrape it off because there's ridges all along here. So just dropping this in carb cleaner will help you get all that cleaned off of there. So this here, that's my metering lever. Little spring underneath it. When that pulses up and down, it moves the needle out in and out of the seat. So these metering levers need to be set properly. I have seen these come out of the factory not set correctly. There's a tool for checking these. So this carburetor is a C1Q. You can probably see it. It's buried down in there. You can see it right there. So on my tool here, C1Q. So I'm going to use this edge to set my metering lever. It's hard to show this. So when I move this, I'm going past my lever. You don't want it to catch on it, but you also don't want it set too low. So this one's not catching. I want it to just brush by it, but not really touch it or grab it. So it's set, I'm going to say, about a hair too low. I don't know what type of hair, but a hair. This isn't low enough to be our running issue, but if this was way out, this can cause a running issue. As part of our carb kit, this stuff, we're going to replace it all. So once we do, we will recheck this to make sure it's set properly before we put it back together. A saw can have a couple different running issues depending on how this metering lever is set. So if this lever is set too low, then the saw will starve for fuel. If this metering lever is set too high, then the saw will get too much fuel. Here's the diaphragm that I took off of it. So this sits on here like this, pulsing on top of that metering lever. A few years ago, we had a 271 Stihl dropped off here. The customer had bought it new somewhere else, and it never ran right from brand new. He had it back to that dealer multiple times. God knows what they did to it. Under warranty, they said it's fixed, and it never would run right for him. He was so frustrated, he was ready to throw it into the dumpster. We asked him to drop it off to let us have a final look. So we took the carb off and we inspected this metering lever, and this was set way too low, right from the factory. So we simply adjusted it, sent it back out. He's still using the saw today. He has multiple chainsaws. He said it's one of his favorite saws. It works excellent. So that just shows you how important this is. The next step here is I'm going to pull this little screen here out with my pick. There it is. There's the screen from the carb. It's spotless clean. I'm going to remove, there's one screw right there. I'm going to remove the metering lever. There's a spring underneath it that will come out. The pivot bar and the needle. And we're going to replace all of that. This is a little Torx. I don't know what size it is. It's wore off, but I'll see if I can look it up. I'm going to go give this carb a good cleaning down through the seat, up through where that screen was, just in case there's something in there. This carb is actually, it looks very clean, but I'm going to clean it anyways just to make sure before we put it back together. I'll be right back. I'm back with my carburetor from cleaning. There wasn't much to clean, but it's done. It's clean and ready for a rebuild. So first thing we're going to do, I'll bring my parts over here one by one. There's a new spring. There's a new needle. There's a new metering lever. And there's a new pivot rod that the metering lever, it goes through the metering lever. It's kind of like a seesaw at the kids' park. And then there is the little screw that holds all that together. Let's put it back together. This is quite finicky. These parts are very little. So my metering lever, my new needle. So it hangs off of the lever. A pivot rod through this little spring. Sits in its, well, maybe. Sits in its little hole there. See that sitting there? So I've got to drop this needle into its hole with this mounted correctly on top of the spring, and while holding this all together, put the screw in to hold it all down. This is one of the most difficult things to learn to do in chainsaw repair. It takes time and patience. A lot of people give up at this point. This rod wants to slide out, this needle wants to drop off, and that spring wants to fall over, which it already did. So let's give this a go here. Okay, so the needle's in, the spring is tucked under. I'm going to keep my thumb on it. I'm going to get my screw in there without letting go of anything. And then we'll just have a look here. Looks like I got it right. So we're going to make sure that this is set correctly now. So I've got my tool back here. So it's not catching. Let me try to get as close as I can here to show you. Couldn't even fit a hair through there if you wanted to. It's actually, it's perfect. Sometimes you'll rebuild these and you'll have to adjust it up or down, and sometimes it'll just be perfect. If you had to adjust it, you would very carefully, with little movements, hold that down, and you can slightly bend this up or slightly bend it down, but very carefully. A little goes a long ways. We don't have to do anything to that. It's perfect. Okay, let's go ahead and put the diaphragm side of this back together. So I've got a new gasket. We have a new diaphragm. I often see chainsaws come in where someone has attempted a rebuild and they've reversed the order of the gasket and the diaphragm. They put the diaphragm on first, which puts it too close to the metering lever. So gasket first, diaphragm second. There's our cover. And then we'll put our 4 screws back in. Put your 4 screws in loose first, and then we'll tighten them all down after. Now let's put the pump side of this back together. I'm going to put my screen in. This is a new screen. You push these screens in. They like to go sideways. So I place it in there. Then you want an object. I'm going to use the end of this. This works pretty good. Just to push it evenly down in there. Just like that. Perfect. Now on this side is opposite of the other side. This fuel pump gasket is going on first. Fuel pump, and then this gasket goes on after. I've seen these come in with these reversed as well. And then the cover. And we'll hold that together. And we'll put our screw back in. There, it's all back together. Okay, so the curb is back together. All my little parts I keep over here on another paper towel, and there's nothing left. That's a good thing. When you do one of these and you have something left over, then you may be going back. Okay, we're about ready to put the saw back together. Just going to clean my workbench off here a bit. All the old parts I take off something. I like to bag them up. Some customers like to inspect them. So all his diaphragms and gaskets. If I've taken it off a saw, then I keep it. And if the customer wants it, he can have it. Fuel filter. Okay, got my muffler here. My cooling plate's all cleaned up. I've dropped my muffler bolts through. And I'll put the muffler back on this. The saw arrived with one cap in it. So I'll put this in and then I'll check to see if I have another one. All these do is keep dirt out of the muffler. Let's put the spark plug in. NGK BPMR 7A. 20 thou, perfect gap. Okay, I've got my rebuilt carburetor here. Another piece of the air filter base. Put these back on. $8 mil. Let's put our choke rod back on. I'm going to put it, attach up here first. And then I'm going to push it down into its place. Okay. Always check to make sure everything's working properly before you carry on. Let's install a new air filter and a new fuel filter. His last air filter, it was beyond help. There was no helping that one. This saw will appreciate this. Let's just touch on air filters for a quick second here. So air filters, if a person cleans them regularly, these can last for years, maybe even decades. I've seen some old air filters. This air filter hasn't been cleaned regularly or ever been cleaned at all, I'm not sure. An air filter is like layers of fabric, and if they go uncleaned, the dirt becomes embedded in the fabric. So sometimes I get asked and told, like, why'd you replace that? You shouldn't have to replace them. Sometimes, yes, you do. These air filters and all these other saws you've seen me work on, these air filters are not expensive, especially considering what this air filter does for your chainsaw. It's well worth the price if you need one. Let's put some gas in this saw. This is a no-spill gas can. I buy these from Stihl, but you can buy them, I think, various different places. Have you ever taken your clutch cover off and seen these little turd-looking things roll out? Looks like the Easter Bunny's been in there. This is sawdust and oil together, and it's been rolling around into little turd-like balls. Just a little tidbit. We're on the home stretch here. Let's put the top cover back on. Okay, we're ready for the bar and chain. I know I could take it out and start it without, but he's going to be running it with a bar and chain, so I want to test it with a bar and chain. Okay, I've got my bar and chain back on. He needs a bar, a chain, and a sprocket. But for going outside and testing purpose, this is going to work for now for me to hear this thing run. And I've put bar oil in it, which you got to put bar oil in them. Well, I think we're ready. Let's take this thing outside and see if it runs any better. I'll see you out there. Okay, the carb has been tuned, so I'm going to start it another time and then we'll head back in. So So as you can see, this 291 runs excellent. No bogging, no need to feather the throttle, lots of acceleration, very easy to start. This is a great running chainsaw. I took it out and started it, and then we tuned it to Stihl specs, and then I started it again and it ran even better. So the final verdict on this saw: questionable fuel, questionable oil mix, a completely stuffed air filter, and then finally the biggest problem was the carburetor, the diaphragm, the fuel pump, distorted and crinkled and just worn out completely. So I was able to rebuild it luckily and not have to replace the whole carburetor. So it came in here originally for a running issue. It would bog on them. So I have resolved that issue. It also came in with a worn out bar, chain, sprocket, and no oil in the reservoir, bar oil. So it'll be up to him if he wants to do this. Sometimes I call customers and they say, oh, I already have a new bar and chain. So who knows? That'll be up to him. But the issue it's here for is resolved. The case is closed on the MS291. I have lots of chainsaws to work on, so let's move on to the next one. Thank you so much for watching.